town. Most kind, most generous. Not nearly so generous, however, as I will hope this gathering is when I launch into this little talk in an area where I am not authoritative. It's not like the UK and Ireland when I talk about William Flynn. I call this little essay of mine, One Man's William Flynn. Ill-structured, ill-informed, ill-advised. We have here in the room tonight two people. Wayne Morrison, with whom I played today and whom I've known for some years, and Tom Paul, who did not play but is here with us tonight from Gulf Mills. And I have to talk about them before I say a word about Flynn, because they are the authorities on William Stephen Flynn, who was born in Milton, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston, in 1890, and who died here in the Philadelphia area in 1945. Wayne and Tom, the dauntless duo, who have uncovered everything you ever wanted to know about Bill Flynn but were afraid to ask. Everything. Everything about every course he either designed from scratch or redesigned or made some revisions to or even thought about designing. They have it all. So I am not only in their debt as I stand here tonight at this podium, I am in awe of their comprehensive, in truth, exhaustive research. What they have uncovered and amassed and put down on paper is the record in all its fascinating glory. When may you expect to hold in your hands the fruit of their labors? I'll hazard a guess and say that it will be next year, but of course it could be the year after. But they are the Flynn authorities. I'm just here as the earnest amateur. Truly. I know that I risk confusing everyone here if I now jump back in time from 2006 to 1934. Then it was, in May of that year, that a man by the name of John R. Todd, president of an engineering firm and possessed of minimal knowledge about golf course architects, wrote to John D. Rockefeller, his friend. And Rockefeller was at the time seriously considering building a course on the family's vast estate up the Hudson from New York City called Pocantico Hills. Todd wrote to John D. Rockefeller thus, quote, "My recommendation would be that when you are ready to go ahead with a course at Pocantico, you get either William Flynn of Toomey and Flynn, Philadelphia, or Donald Ross of Pinehurst, North Carolina, to make the preliminary layout. Neither one is awfully good. Because from my experience and my inquiries, I don't believe there is a competent golf architect in America or in England. You will have to work with the best available, and it is my opinion that Messrs. Flynn and Ross come nearest to your requirements." That's 1934. Bill Flynn was to do perhaps 3 courses after that. All of his splendid work had been done over the 15, 19 years preceding, and yet there is where his reputation stood. All right, so now we leap forward from 1934, when Mr. Todd is writing to Mr. Rockefeller and saying, well, it's the best you can do. In 1974 now, when an extraordinary thing happened. In May of that year, the USGA, as it had been doing for some time, published an issue of Golf Journal. Now, that is not the news. But in this issue, was a trailblazing piece by Frank Hannigan, who would serve from 1983 to 1989 as executive director of the USGA. But this piece by Hannigan, and I happen to own that May 1974 issue of Golf Journal. Indeed, the first thing I ever wrote that was published precisely 2 years later in Golf Journal. But I do have this. You can't even pull the pages apart because they've been in basements and been rained on and leaked on and so forth. But here is this most important moment. For what Frank Hannigan wrote here was a true rara avis, a full-blown account of the life and work of a golf course architect. Believe it or not. No, as most of you probably realize, that architect was not Bill Flynn. But it was another Philadelphian, A.W. Albert Warren Tillinghast. And what prompted this article? How did it come to be? Why, someone at Golf House happened to notice that of the 10 USGA competitions in the year 1974, 4 of them were being played on Tillinghast courses. The Open at Winged Foot, the Curtis Cup at San Francisco Golf, the Junior Championship at Brooklawn up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and the Amateur at Ridgewood up in northern New Jersey. A surprising business indeed, they huffed at Golf House. 4 of our 10 events on golf courses by the same man? Must be something to this chap. Better get a hold of him. It was too late. He had died 30 years earlier. In any event, this is how it all began. In 1974, with the publication of the Tillinghast piece. This marked the rise to eminence, indeed, the near deification of golf course architects. Almost overnight, nothing is really overnight except in hindsight. Almost overnight, any golfer worthy of the name had to become at least mildly familiar with the important figures in course design. Men who suddenly were catapulted from landscape gardeners to poets of topography. The game's true artistes. Men like Donald Ross and Alistair Mackenzie. Did you know that Mackenzie, perhaps the single greatest architect in the annals of the game, did you know that he died near penniless in his home in Santa Cruz, California, with the Augustan National Golf Club still owing him $400? Talk about the Great Depression. 1934, Mackenzie is gone, and he never did get paid by Augusta. And other figures that here we have a certain kinship with, like Hugh Wilson, and George Crump, and George Thomas, and Tilly, and Bill Flynn. Sounds like the Philadelphia School of Golf Course Architecture. And then we would have to be at least modestly aware of the achievements of Robert Trent Jones and Sons, Poppy and Reese, of George and Tom Fazio, Pete Dye, Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and now John Doak and David McClay Kidd, and the team of Coor and Crenshaw. And I ask you, could there possibly be 5 American courses greater than Sand Hills? I doubt it. Yes, these were the new crown princes of the game, commanding fees of $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, plus jet fuel. And for laying out the Monroe Country Club 9, some 50 miles north of New York City, in 1923, Bill Flynn had been paid $303.27. Well, in the fullness of time, the name of the great man in whose honor we gather tonight did indeed surface. He lived in Philadelphia, didn't he? And a lot of his work, I suppose, can be seen on decent courses there. But the casual observer was likely to focus on those Flynn courses that have some kind of a national reputation, or at least have been the venue for important national championships. Courses like Cherry Hills, with its 3 opens, Ralph Gouldall in 1938, Arnold Palmer in 1960, and Andy North in 1978. We know Cherry Hills. And Shinnecock Hills, with the 1986 Open, Ray Floyd, and the 1995 Open with Corey Pavin. And if I have to see that forward once more. And the 2004 Open that was won by Retief Goosen, or was that Open won by the 7th green? And the Cascades course at the Homestead, which has been the site of the amateur, the mid-amateur, the women's amateur. Hey, listen, the women's amateur of 1928 was won by the immortal Glenna Collette, who 2 years later would become Glenna Collette Bear, and intelligent woman that she was, moved to Philadelphia and become a member of this very firm. The great Glenna. And another women's event down at the Homestead is, marked indelibly in the history books, was the 1965 Women's Open, when a slip of a French girl by the name of Catherine Lacoste, that's right, the little crocodiles on the shirt, Catherine Lacoste whipped a field that included such luminaries as Kathy Whitworth and Louise Suggs and Donna Capone and Carol Mann. This 22-year-old French amateur won the United States Women's Open on the great Cascades course. No other amateur has ever won that crown. And of course the country club at Brookline, where a composite course that is probably more Bill Flynn than anybody else, was the site of the 1963 Open, when Julius Boros beat Jackie Cupid and Arnold Palmer in a playoff, the 1988 Open, in which Curtis Strange beat Nick Faldo in a playoff, and of course, the unforgettable 1999 Ryder Cup, just in case we never win another one. And not to be overlooked, the Spring Mill course of the Philadelphia Country Club. The club then had its original 18 in the city at Fallon, but here in 1939, Byron Nelson, so close to this club all his life. I tell you how close he was. I didn't intend to tell this, but when I think that he's gone, I feel that I must tell it. He's 90. This probably happened 10 years ago. Greg, you know better than I. When Tim DeBuffrey bowed out, when our head professional of long tenure in the club bowed out. Byron Nelson came from Roanoke, Texas at 84, 85, 86, what was he? To be on hand for the farewell dinner for Tim DeBuffrey. What prompted this? Well, Byron had come in 1991, 1990 for the centennial of the club, and at that time grew even closer to our head pro. And our head pro and several of our members had been down there to play in Nelson's Invitational. And Byron Nelson felt he must come. And so he did at age 84 or 85 or 86. Extraordinary. But that was him. It was the perfect measure of the man. Anyway, that Nelson victory here, of course, came after the tragic Snead collapse, the meltdown on what is now the third hole, but was then the 18th hole when he took 8 on a hole he was looking to take 4 on. And that was the end of him. And then in came Nelson, and in came Craig Wood, and in came Denny Shute, 3 of the very best players in the game. And off they went the next day and played 18 holes, and Shute played poorly, shot 76, that was the end of him, but Nelson and Wood tied once again, and off they went to play another 18, none of this sudden death stuff. None of these 4 holes. It's 18 or nothing. And it was in what was then the 4th hole, now the 17th hole, that Nelson hit what was surely the greatest single full-blooded shot ever struck in the United States Open. When from up on the plateau at 215 feet from the green, he holed it with a 1-iron. And as he said in his biography, that ball landed short, started to run, raced into that hole like a rat. That's exactly what did happen. Nelson then taking a 3-stroke lead on Craig Wood and proceeding to breeze around the other 14 holes and win the Open, his only Open. No wonder he felt close to this club. So that, in capsule, is at least a glance at the Flynn courses that were caught in the glare of the national spotlight from time to time. Now, with your kind permission, and you have to be kind, I'll roam over the Bill Flynn courses that I have personally played, most of them here in the Philadelphia area, not all. Marion West, the personification of sporty golf. Indeed, Darwood should have had it in mind. Of course he didn't, but he should have had it in mind when he coined his wonderful phrase, pleasurable excitement. Because that is what we seek on the golf course, in case it never struck you. It's really why you're out there. You want something that's got a bit of adrenaline in it and a lot of pleasure. Thus, you do not go to Pine Valley for pleasurable excitement. In any event, the West Course is terrific stuff over there. And its opening in 1914 made Marion the first golf club in America with 2 18s. And then there was Doylestown in 1916, and Eaglesmere in 1919, and Lancaster Country Club in 1920, among the most rigorously demanding collection of long par 4s you can ever play. Even when I could handle the game, I couldn't handle Lancaster. Singled out in Tom Doak's Confidential Guide to Golf Courses as one of his 31 gourmet choices. And Pocono Manor, now, am I right to remember that that's where Art Wall was the pro? And he made those 48 holes in one. Not quite 48, how many? 23. It's kind of a silly place, but sort of fun. And then Bala Golf Club, 1922, very short, but still worthy. Jay Sigel learned the game. And in 1952, Louise Suggs won the United States Women's Open there. And when Philadelphia Country Club sold its property right down city line from the Bala Golf Club. You gotta love this moment. The Bala Golf Club was the great beneficiary, because the country club's greens were rolled up and trucked down City Line and laid out at Bala, where they have served splendidly ever since. And the country club of Atlantic City, neat stuff, aided no little by the Tonto changes a few years back. Not a links, not really golf by the sea, but nonetheless somehow linksy, and we do dearly love it. And Concord, and McCall Field, on all of 88 acres. I learned about it as a child, when my father, who worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad, would always play in the matches with the Philadelphia Electric Company, the railroad against the electric company. And the electric company built and owned McCall Field. Bill Flynn did that golf course on 88 acres, and running through it is nothing other than Cobb's Creek, the same Cobb's Creek that works its way through Marion East. And the Cascades at the Homestead, which I've mentioned, that I've played at least 50 times. Small wonder that Sam Snead called it, quote, the most complete golf course I know. And then he made it a point to play it a couple of times right before any major championship, because every golf club in the bag is called for there, and every type of stance and lie is encountered there. And holes 12 and 13, consecutive fours on that course, were both chosen for the marvelous, the seminal book, The 500 Greatest Golf Holes in the World. The only occasion when consecutive holes on a course were chosen for that book. And of course, who could ever forget the finish down there, because it's, on the face of it, utterly wacky. You say, how can this be? How can you finish a round of golf and the holes are a par 3, a par 5, a par 5, and a par 3. The last 4 holes don't have a par 4. And I think that's called taking what the ground gives you. And Cherry Hills, which we've spoken of before, but I must again, the first club west of the Mississippi to host the United States Open. And the Flynn sketches of his 18 holes there, meticulous to the 9th degree, were framed by the club and now hang in the men's card room. And I could never forget the last 7 holes there. Each one of them, at least one shot imperiled by water. 7 water holes in a row, finishing that game at Cherry Hills. In addition to its 3 opens, Cherry Hills has hosted 2 PGAs, with Vic Gezzi winning in 1941 and Hubert Green in 1985, and among its other national championships, with the 1983 Mid-Am, which Jay Sigel won, the 1990 Amateur, which Phil Mickelson won, the 2005 United States Women's Open, which Bertie, who? Oh, Bertie Kim hit that crazy bunker shot. And the 1993 United States Seniors Open, which turned out to be a very important one because it marked the last of Jack Nicklaus's 8 USGA championships. And then there's Green Valley, about 10 minutes away from here, and the Norfolk Naval Base course. I will not forget it. I lost an 8-iron there in 1951, and it still hasn't been returned. And manufacturers over on the other side of the river, which just happens to be my personal Flynn favorite in Philadelphia. And anybody who ever reads my Philadelphia book will see me going on at length, endlessly on manufacturers, describing every hole. It's because it's my favorite. And Lehigh Country Club, starring the little Lehigh River and a flock of marvelous golf holes. And Rolling Green, which is about 20 minutes the other way, which turned out to be too tough for the best women in the world in the 1976 Women's Open, when at no point in the 4 rounds was the course ever set up as long as 6,000 yards. And yet, the best score at 72 holes was a tie at 8 over par by Joanne Corner and Sandra Palmer, and then Joanne won in a not too brilliantly played playoff with her 76. Poor Miss Palmer had settled for 78. Rolling Green, surely one of the 3 best Flynn courses in the Philadelphia area. And the Country Club at Brookline, which I played just this summer, and Plymouth Country Club, which is about 15 minutes away here, and Huntingdon Valley, which has 3 Flynn 9s, all of them excellent. And the C9, the one that they just brought back to life about 6 years ago, maybe the toughest Bill Flynn 9 there is. Wonderful stuff. And Springdale, if you've never played it, it's a little paradise in the heart of the Princeton campus. And Woodcrest, on the Jersey side of the Delaware, and Strong. And Seaview's Pines course, builded only the first 9 there, but it's still terrific stuff. Down in Absecon, and then the United States Naval Academy, which I played in 1950. And Flynn there redesigned an existing 9 and added a new 9, and it's short, but it's demanding. And finally, of course, Shinnecock Hills. And I must tell you about doing something there that you can no longer do. And I was saddened indeed to learn of it. This was in the early 80s, before the Ray Floyd Open. And I went out there with my wife, who has never struck a golf ball. And I was to play 2 days, and we were overnighting in that historic clubhouse. Stanford White, 1890, the first American golf clubhouse. And it is possible that even today, though these 116 years or so, it may be the best golf clubhouse. So we stopped at a little desk inside, and they handed us a key and said, would you just go up those stairs and walk along, and you'll see a door that has this number on it. And sure enough, we did. And we opened the door and we walked in, and it was absolutely classic. If your Aunt Florence ever had a seashore house, this is the bedroom that she had 8 of. A couple of painted wicker chairs, a couple of old painted pine chests with wood knobs, 2 simple brass beds, 1 window with a screen in it. We're not talking air conditioned here. Not a chance. We were charmed, utterly charmed, you have to be. So we had our cocktail there, listening to the cicadas and all the other bugs that you could hear out over the course, and not another sound, because there's nobody in any other room. There's not another person in the clubhouse. And you know that if you go there for the night, there will be nothing to eat. So you have to leave, get in your car, drive into Southampton, and find a restaurant and eat, which is exactly what we did. And that key that led us into our room would also let you back into the clubhouse. And so we drove up, and there was a lonely little light over the front door, and in we went with the turn of the key, absolute blackness. And I said, got to have ice. I can't live without ice. And my wife said, where are we going to get it? I said, well, you know that somewhere in the void is the kitchen. Got to be down. So we walked along the walls and found the switch to turn, and we got a light on. And I just kept right on walking. I walked in the kitchen. You had one of the great, huge refrigerator freezers that a big kitchen would have. Get in there, get those ice cubes out of the tray, put them in a couple of glasses. Now up we go. And up into our simple little quarters. And we go to bed. as here. When I joined this club, there were 8 guest rooms. And then there were 4. And then there were 2. And now there are none. It's the kind of thing that happened out at Shinnecock. Nevertheless, one of Flynn's greatest moments, and as our friends Wayne and Tom tell us in their new book, Dick Wilson was Bill Flynn's guy on the job at Shinnecock Hills. Worked for Toohey and Flynn and was commissioned to pull this whole thing together. But Dick Wilson had ideas of his own. And Bill Flynn had one idea of his own. And he shot out to Southampton and laid the law down to his young assistant. Follow the plan. And the golf course that we play there today, that the Open is played on there today, is Flynn from start to finish. Okay, we're back at long last right here, home base to the Philadelphia Country Club and the Spring Mill course, which opened in 1927. I think it's one of Flynn's gems. Classic example of the courses built during the golden age of golf course design, which I place from 1910 to 1930. Because once you entered the Depression, there were no new jobs, so it's essentially, if you got one in that 10-year period, you were a very lucky architect. The course outside these window walls has served me well over the last 40 years, not a weak or indifferent hole on it, and a routing plane that takes full advantage of the natural features of this rolling land. 4 superlative short holes. The falling shot on the 5th, the water menaced green. The 7th, that pear-shaped green, corseted by sand, saying to you, stronger you hit your shot, the broader your target will be. The 11th, so Redan-like in appearance, copying to a degree the great hole, the 15th at North Barrett. And the truth is, when you get up to putt, the right front isn't raised and the left front isn't low. But as you stand on the tee, looking at that great pit under the left front, you say, my God, this is the Redan again. But it's certainly what Flynn had in mind. And then you come to the final hole, the 225-yarder up the hill, which generally plays at 245 or 250. And Doak, in his confidential guide, called it the hardest 15th hole in the world. I submit that's a lot of nonsense, but it's charming to see it in print. And above all, we remember here at the club Arnold Palmer coming to that hole. Arnold Palmer loves this golf course, just loves it. Indeed, it is his favorite course in the Philadelphia area. Imagine putting it above Marion and Pine Valley. You've got to be crazy. Arnold Palmer doesn't. But the first time he came off the 14th green, walked up to the 15th tee, saw where the markers were aiming, looked up the hill and said, what the hell kind of a par 4 is this? And one of his companions said, Arnold, the kind that's a par 3. I believe this to be a great course. And I believe it's very unusual in the path it has taken to greatness. For unlike, say, Pine Valley or Augusta National, it is not filled with great holes. What we have here is an unbroken run of excellence, a consistency of quality, the sum total of which, it seems to me, adds up to greatness. No 2 holes are alike, yet they are all of a piece. And everyone, which is to say anyone, of either gender and any skill level, can thoroughly enjoy this grand, nay, great 18, day in and day out. I, for one, have played it some 10,000 times, but who's counting? Thank you.
Well, you know what, now that I got the microphone in my hand, you guys were a big trouble. You guys hear the one about the 1 hour man who can't count change? Okay, so, no. I was hoping maybe we could have a brief question and answer if Jim would, be kind enough, if anybody had a question. Like, I have a burning question, and I've always wanted to ask Jim. What is your favorite golf hole in all of Philadelphia? And I've played any number of golf courses.
In all of Philadelphia area?
In the whole Philadelphia area. Your favorite, if you had to play one hole?
Okay.
It's not a question that is ever asked. Favorite course? Yes. Not favorite hole, but if I'm forced to say. For me, it would be, it's all I can no longer play at all, but for me, it would be the 13th at Pine Valley.
Yeah.
So those who have ever played there know from a slightly low tee to a vast plateau fairway, which now turns left